11 p.m. The hotel corridor stretched silent marble floors cold under flickering chandeliers. Derek's phone buzzed. One message from Caroline Ashford, the most powerful woman in the corporation. "Single dad, my room opens. Come with me." His grip tightened. Behind him, whispers crawled from the front desk. Coworkers exchanged glances, smirks barely hidden. They all assumed the same thing. But none of them knew what Derek was hiding tonight. He stepped into the elevator, pressed the penthouse button. The doors sealed shut like a verdict. Whatever waited in that room would cost him something. He just didn't know what yet. The Ashford Grand Hotel gleamed like a cathedral of wealth at the edge of downtown. Its 32 floors piercing the night sky with windows that never went dark. Derek Holloway had worked here for 3 years, managing the night shift with the kind of quiet efficiencies that made him invisible to guests and indispensable to management. He knew every corridor, every service elevator, every supply closet where housekeeping hid their cigarettes during breaks. The marble under his feet had memorized the rhythm of his footsteps, and the chandeliers above had witnessed 1,000 nights just like this one. Except tonight was different. Tonight his 6-year-old daughter was sleeping on a makeshift bed of spare uniforms in the staff room. Her small body curled into a question mark, her breath soft and trusting in a world that had given her every reason not to trust. 4 years ago, Derek had buried his wife in a cemetery overlooking the river she used to love. Cancer had taken her in 8 months, swift and merciless, leaving him with a toddler who still asked for mama, and a mortgage that didn't care about grief. He had sold their house, moved into a 2-bedroom apartment near the bus line, and taken every shift the hotel offered. Night manager paid better than day staff, and Penny slept through most of it anyway. Mrs. Patterson from next door watched her until bedtime. Then Derek would check on her through the nanny camera until his shift ended at 6 in the morning. It wasn't ideal. Nothing about single fatherhood was ideal. But it worked most nights, and that was all he could ask for. Tonight, Mrs. Patterson's daughter had gone into early labor, and Derek had received the call at 4 in the afternoon, with no time to find a replacement. He had 2 choices: call in sick and lose a day's pay he couldn't afford, or bring Penny to the hotel and pray no one noticed. The staff room had a couch, a lock on the door, and a small television that played cartoons until she fell asleep. He had done this twice before, both times without incident. But those nights, Caroline Ashford hadn't been in the building. The elevator climbed in silence, floor numbers blinking like a countdown to something Derek couldn't name. He caught his reflection in the polished brass doors, 40 years old. Shoulders still broad from the construction work he'd done in his 20s. Hair going gray at the temples, in a way his wife used to say, made him look distinguished. She had been wrong about that, he thought. He looked tired. He looked like a man who had stopped dreaming and started surviving, and there was nothing distinguished about that. The penthouse floor announced itself with a soft chime. Derek stepped out onto carpet so thick it swallowed the sound of his footsteps. The hallway here smelled different than the rest of the hotel, less like cleaning chemicals, and more like money, that particular fragrance of fresh flowers and expensive wood polish that rich people seemed to carry with them wherever they went. He had been up here only a handful of times, usually to fix a leaky faucet or reset a temperamental thermostat. The guests on this floor didn't like to see staff unless absolutely necessary, and Derek had learned to move like a ghost, present but unseen. Room 3212 sat at the end of the hall, its door slightly ajar. A sliver of warm light spilled onto the carpet like an invitation. Or a trap. Derek stopped 3 feet away, suddenly aware of his heartbeat, the way it hammered against his ribs like something trying to escape. He had seen Caroline Ashford exactly 11 times in his 3 years at the hotel, always from a distance, always in motion. She moved through the building like a storm system trailing assistance and anxiety in her wake. The staff called her the Ice Queen behind her back, though never within earshot. She had fired people for less. But what Derek remembered most wasn't the power suits or the cutting remarks. It was the way she looked at people like she was solving an equation, and they were just variables to be calculated. He had caught her eye once 2 months ago when she had toured the night operations, and he had been the only manager on duty. She had asked him 3 questions about staffing efficiency, listened to his answers, with an intensity that made him feel both seen and dissected, then moved on without a word of acknowledgement. That night, he had dreamed about her for the first time. He had woken up angry at himself, and the anger had lingered like smoke. Derek knocked twice on the doorframe. The sliver of light widened as the door swung inward, and there she was. Caroline Ashford stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city sprawled behind her like a circuit board of lights. She wore a silk robe the color of midnight, her dark hair loose around her shoulders, in a way Derek had never seen. Without the armor of her business attire, she looked smaller, somehow, more human. But her eyes were the same, sharp and assessing, missing nothing. "Close the door," she said. Her voice was cool, controlled, the kind of voice that expected obedience without needing to raise itself. Derek stepped inside and let the door click shut behind him, painfully aware of the intimacy of the gesture. The room was larger than his entire apartment, all cream-colored furniture and abstract art that probably cost more than his annual salary. A laptop sat open on the desk, its screen dark. Beside it, a crystal glass held 2 fingers of amber liquid. "You wanted to see me, Ms. Ashford." Derek kept his voice neutral, professional. Whatever this was, he wouldn't let her see him sweat. Caroline turned from the window, and for a moment something flickered across her face. Not anger, not exactly. Something closer to disappointment. "Do you know why I'm here this week, Mr. Holloway?" she asked. "Quarterly inspection," Derek said. "You do them personally at each property." "I do them personally because I don't trust anyone else to tell me the truth." She crossed to the desk and picked up a tablet, its screen glowing to life under her touch. "I've been reviewing security footage, routine audit of all floors, all shifts. Would you like to guess what I found?" Derek's stomach dropped. He knew what she had found. He had known it was a risk, had calculated the odds, and decided they were worth taking. But standing here now, watching her scroll through footage with those calculating eyes, he realized how badly he had miscalculated. "A child," Caroline said. And there it was. A little girl, to be specific, sleeping in the staff room on level 2, wearing pajamas with cartoon rabbits on them, clutching a stuffed elephant like her life depended on it. She looked up from the tablet, her gaze pinning Derek in place. "Your daughter, I presume." Derek didn't deny it. There was no point. "Yes, ma'am. Her name is Penny." "Penny?" Caroline repeated the name like she was tasting it, testing its weight on her tongue. "And you thought it was appropriate to bring a 6-year-old child into a working hotel in the middle of the night. My babysitter had a family emergency. I didn't have another option. You could have called in sick. I can't afford to call in sick." The words came out harder than Derek intended, edged with a frustration he usually kept buried. "I'm the only night manager on shift. If I don't show up, the whole operation falls apart. And I need this job, Ms. Ashford. I need every hour of every paycheck to keep a roof over my daughter's head." Caroline's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the air between them, some subtle recalibration of the equation she was always solving. She set the tablet down on the desk and took a step toward him, close enough that Derek could smell her perfume, something floral and expensive that made his chest tight for reasons he didn't want to examine. "So you turned my hotel into a daycare facility," she said. "You violated at least 3 company policies, exposed us to potential liability, and risked your daughter's safety, all because you didn't want to lose a day's pay." Derek met her eyes and held them. "With respect, Ms. Ashford, my daughter was safer in that locked room than she would have been alone in our apartment. I checked on her every 30 minutes. She had food, water, and her favorite cartoons. And I've given this hotel 3 years of my life without a single complaint, a single sick day, a single mistake. If that doesn't earn me 1 night of grace, then maybe I was wrong about what kind of company this is. The silence that followed was so complete, Derek could hear the hum of the air conditioning, the distant wail of a siren somewhere in the city below. Caroline stared at him with an expression he couldn't read. Her lips pressed into a thin line, her fingers curled at her sides. He waited for the words that would end his career, rehearsing how he would tell Penny they had to move again, how he would explain to a 6-year-old that sometimes doing the right thing still led to the wrong outcome. But the words didn't come. Instead, Caroline walked to the window and stood with her back to him, her reflection ghost-like in the glass. When she spoke again, her voice was different, softer, stripped of its corporate armor. My father started this company in 1978 with one motel outside of Tulsa, she said. 12 rooms, a broken ice machine, and a sign that flickered so badly, the truckers called it the Ashford strobe light. A sound escaped her that might have been a laugh, bitter and brief. He used to bring me to work with him when I was a girl. I'd fall asleep on the office couch while he balanced the books by hand. Then he'd carry me to the car at midnight and tuck me into the back seat. I thought it was an adventure. I didn't understand until years later that he did it because he couldn't afford a babysitter either. Derek said nothing. He sensed that she wasn't looking for a response, that she was talking to herself as much as to him. On the desk, her phone buzzed with an incoming message, but she ignored it. I have spent 20 years building this company into something he would be proud of, Caroline continued. I have sacrificed everything. My marriage, my health, my ability to sleep more than 4 hours a night. And somewhere along the way, I forgot what it felt like to be the person on the other side of the desk, the person who brings their child to work because the alternative is worse. She turned from the window, then, and Derek saw something in her face that made his breath catch. Not anger, not disappointment. Something that looked almost like recognition, like she was seeing him clearly for the first time. 1 week, she said. I'm staying for 1 more week to complete the inspection. During that time, you will report to me directly. I want to see how you run this operation, what you do well, what needs improvement. Consider it a trial period. And if I fail, then you're fired and we never have this conversation again. Caroline picked up her glass and took a slow sip, her eyes never leaving his face. But if you succeed, Mr. Holloway, you might find that I'm not the monster everyone thinks I am. Derek stood at the threshold of the door, his hand on the brass handle, every instinct telling him to accept her offer and leave before she changed her mind. But something held him in place, a stubbornness that had gotten him into trouble more times than he could count. Thank you for the opportunity, Ms. Ashford, he said. But I want you to know something. I don't need your pity. I don't need special treatment because my wife is dead, and I'm raising a daughter alone. I just need a fair chance to prove what I'm worth. Caroline's expression flickered, and for just a moment the mask slipped. Derek saw something raw underneath, something wounded and familiar, but it was gone before he could name it, replaced by the cool professionalism she wore like armor. Get some sleep, Mr. Holloway, she said. Tomorrow I'm going to make your life very difficult. Derek nodded and stepped into the hallway, pulling the door closed behind him. The click of the latch echoed in the empty corridor like a period at the end of a sentence. He stood there for a long moment, replaying the conversation in his head, trying to make sense of what had just happened. He had walked into that room expecting to be fired. He was walking out with something that felt almost like a second chance. But as he rode the elevator back down to the 2nd floor, where his daughter was still sleeping peacefully in a room full of spare uniforms, Derek couldn't shake the feeling that Caroline Ashford had been testing him for something. He just didn't know what yet. The week that followed was the longest of Derek's life. True to her word, Caroline appeared everywhere he went, materializing in doorways and corridors like she had memorized his schedule. She watched him handle a noise complaint from room 814 with a patience that bordered on theatrical. She observed him coordinate a last-minute room change for a VIP guest whose luggage had been lost by the airline. She stood in silence as he talked a young housekeeper through her first panic attack, his voice low and steady, his hand on her shoulder, until her breathing slowed. And through it all, she asked questions. Endless questions about staffing ratios and inventory management and the particular challenges of running a skeleton crew between midnight and 6 in the morning. Derek answered every question honestly, even when honesty wasn't what she wanted to hear. He told her the front desk computers were 15 years old and crashed at least twice a night. He told her the heating system on the 4th floor had been temperamental since October, and no one had bothered to fix it properly. He told her that 3 of his best employees were actively looking for other jobs because the hotel across the street paid $2 more an hour and offered health insurance that didn't require a second mortgage. Caroline listened to all of it with that inscrutable expression, making notes on her tablet, occasionally asking a follow-up question that revealed just how closely she had been paying attention. Derek found himself looking forward to their conversations in a way that troubled him, anticipating her arrival each night, like a student awaiting a grade. He told himself it was professional respect, nothing more. But when she smiled at something he said on the 4th night, a small, surprised smile that transformed her whole face, he felt it in his chest, like a second heartbeat. Penny complicated things further. On the 3rd night of Caroline's inspection, Derek's backup babysitter canceled with food poisoning, and he found himself facing the same impossible choice. This time, he called the hotel and explained the situation to the front desk, fully prepared to take the night off and accept the consequences. But 20 minutes later, his phone rang. "Bring her," Caroline said without preamble. "I'll have housekeeping set up the couch in my suite with proper bedding. She can sleep there while you work." Derek hesitated, his grip tightening on the phone. "That's not necessary, Ms. Ashford. I can figure something out." It wasn't a suggestion. The line went dead. That night, Penny met Caroline Ashford for the first time, and Derek watched something shift in the universe. His daughter, who was shy with strangers to the point of hiding behind his legs, walked right up to the most powerful woman he had ever met and asked her why she looked so sad. Caroline had frozen her face, going blank in a way that Derek recognized as defensive. But Penny wasn't deterred. She had inherited her mother's stubbornness and her father's inability to leave well enough alone. She tugged on the sleeve of Caroline's silk blouse and repeated the question, her voice high and clear in the elegant silence of the penthouse suite. "Why do you look sad? Did someone hurt your feelings?" "When I'm sad, my daddy makes me hot chocolate and tells me stories about mommy." "Do you have someone who tells you stories?" Derek had stepped forward, ready to apologize, to gather his daughter and retreat before the situation got any worse. But Caroline held up a hand to stop him, and when she knelt down to Penny's level, her voice was softer than Derek had ever heard it. "I used to have someone who told me stories," Caroline said. "But that was a long time ago." Penny considered this with the gravity of a philosopher. Then she reached into the pocket of her pajamas and pulled out a folded piece of paper, wrinkled and worn from being carried everywhere. It was a drawing she had made the week before, 2 stick figures holding hands under a yellow sun. "This is for you," Penny said, pressing the paper into Caroline's hand. "It's a picture of Happy. You can keep it so you remember what it looks like." Derek watched Caroline's face as she unfolded the drawing, watched the way her composure cracked, and something raw leaked through. She stared at those 2 stick figures for a long moment, her throat working, her eyes glistening in the lamplight. Then she looked up at Penny with an expression that Derek would remember for the rest of his life. "Thank you," Caroline whispered. "I'll keep it forever." After that night, everything changed. Caroline still maintained her professional distance during working hours, still asked her pointed questions, and made her cryptic notes. But there were moments now, small cracks in the armor that Derek learned to recognize. She started arriving earlier to check on Penny, bringing books from the hotel gift shop and treats from the kitchen that she pretended were just lying around. She sat with the sleeping child while Derek made his rounds, and more than once he returned to find them both asleep on the couch, Caroline's hand resting protectively on Penny's back. Derek began to see glimpses of the woman behind the title. He learned that she hadn't taken a vacation in 4 years, that she ate dinner at her desk, more nights than not, that she couldn't remember the last time someone had asked her how she was doing without wanting something in return. He learned that her ex-husband had left her for a younger woman 2 weeks after their 10th anniversary, and that the divorce had been so brutal she had changed her last name back to Ashford just to erase any trace of him. He learned that she carried her loneliness like a stone in her chest, heavy and familiar, so much a part of her that she had forgotten what it felt like to breathe without it. And Caroline, in turn, learned about him, about the wife he still dreamed about, the guilt he carried for not being able to save her, about the terror of single fatherhood, the constant fear that he was failing in ways he couldn't see, about the way Penny had saved his life in those dark months after the funeral. Her small hand in his, the only thing keeping him tethered to a world that no longer made sense. They talked in the quiet hours between midnight and dawn, when the hotel slept and the city beyond the windows pulsed with distant life. They talked about grief and survival and the particular loneliness of being strong for everyone else. And somewhere in those conversations, somewhere between the silences and the shared understanding, Derek felt something shift inside him. Something that had been frozen since his wife's death began slowly and painfully to thaw. On the 5th night, the elevator broke down. Derek was on the 7th floor, dealing with a burst pipe, when his radio crackled with the news. He sprinted to the service stairs, taking them 2 at a time, his heart pounding with something that felt too much like fear. The elevator had stopped between floors 8 and 9, and the guest trapped inside was starting to panic. He could hear the muffled screaming through the walls. As he reached the 8th floor, a woman's voice, high and hysterical. He pried open the outer doors with the emergency tool and found himself looking down into darkness. The elevator car was about 4 feet below its emergency lights, casting a sickly yellow glow. And there, standing at the edge of the opening, was Caroline Ashford. "I heard the commotion," she said, her voice tight but controlled. "The guest is having a severe panic attack. We need to get her out now." Derek didn't waste time asking questions. He grabbed a rope from the maintenance closet and lowered himself into the gap between floors, his shoulders scraping against the walls as he squeezed into the space above the elevator car. The emergency hatch was stuck, rusted shut from years of neglect. He braced his feet against the walls and pulled until his muscles screamed, until the hatch finally gave way with a groan of tortured metal. Inside the elevator, a young woman was curled in the corner, sobbing uncontrollably, her whole body shaking with terror. Derek dropped through the hatch and knelt beside her, speaking in the same low, steady voice he used with Penny during thunderstorms. "You're okay," he said. "I've got you. We're going to get you out of here." It took 20 minutes to calm her down enough to move. Derek lifted her through the hatch, while Caroline reached down from above, and together they pulled the trembling woman to safety. By the time the elevator tech arrived to fix the malfunction, the guest was wrapped in a blanket in the lobby, sipping hot tea and telling anyone who would listen about the angel who had saved her life. But Derek barely heard any of it. He was standing in the hallway outside the staff room, blood trickling from a cut on his arm where the hatch had sliced him open. Caroline appeared beside him without a word, a first aid kit in her hand. "Sit down," she said. Not a request. Derek sat on the floor with his back against the wall, too exhausted to argue. Caroline knelt beside him and took his arm in her hands, her touch surprisingly gentle as she cleaned the wound. The antiseptic stung, but Derek barely felt it. He was focused on her face, on the furrow between her brows, as she concentrated on the way her dark hair fell forward to hide her expression. "You could have been killed," she said quietly. "Part of the job." "No, it isn't." She looked up at him then, and Derek saw that her eyes were wet tears she was fighting to hold back. "That elevator hasn't been properly inspected in 3 years. I found the report buried in the maintenance files. My own company almost killed you tonight because someone decided to cut corners on safety inspections." Derek covered her hand with his own, stilling her movements. "It wasn't your fault." "Everything that happens in these hotels is my fault," Caroline said. "That's what it means to be in charge. The buck stops with me. Every shortcut, every neglected repair, every employee who goes home injured because I was too focused on profit margins to pay attention. It all comes back to me." She pulled her hand away and finished bandaging his arm, her movements brisk and efficient once more. But when she spoke again, her voice cracked around the edges. "I had a daughter once," she said. "Her name was Rosie. She died when she was 6 years old, the same age as Penny." Derek stopped breathing. The hallway around them faded to nothing, leaving only Caroline's voice and the weight of what she was about to tell him. "She had a heart condition we didn't know about, a congenital defect that the doctors missed in all her checkups. One day she was running around the backyard laughing, perfectly healthy. The next day she collapsed at school and never woke up." Caroline's hands were shaking now, the first aid supplies forgotten in her lap. "My husband blamed me, said I was never home, that I chose my career over my family. And maybe he was right. Maybe if I had been paying attention, I would have noticed something was wrong. Maybe I could have saved her." Derek reached out and took her hand again, holding it firmly in his own. "That's not how it works," he said. "Believe me, I know. I spent 2 years blaming myself for my wife's cancer, convinced that if I had noticed, sooner, forced her to see a doctor earlier, she might still be alive. But the truth is, some things just happen. They're not punishments. They're not lessons. They're just the terrible random cruelty of a universe that doesn't care about our plans." Caroline looked at him with those haunted eyes, and Derek saw all the years of guilt and grief and self-recrimination she had been carrying alone. He recognized it because he carried the same weight himself. Different circumstances, different losses, but the same unbearable burden of wondering what if. "Every time I look at Penny," Caroline whispered, "I see Rosie. I see everything I lost, everything I'll never get back, and it breaks my heart all over again." Derek squeezed her hand. "Then stop looking at what you lost," he said gently. "Start looking at what's right in front of you." For a long moment, neither of them moved. The hotel hummed around them, oblivious to the earthquake happening in the quiet hallway outside the staff room. Then Caroline leaned forward, closing the distance between them, and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, two wounded people testing the boundaries of something they had both sworn never to feel again. But then Derek's hand came up to cup her face, and Caroline's fingers tangled in his hair, and the kiss deepened into something fierce and desperate and achingly alive. They kissed like drowning survivors reaching shore, like prisoners seeing sunlight for the first time in years. They kissed until the cut on Derek's arm started bleeding again, and neither of them cared. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Caroline's eyes were bright with tears, and something else. Something that looked almost like hope. "I don't know how to do this," she said. "I don't know how to be the person you deserve." Derek brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch reverent. "Neither do I," he admitted. "But I'm willing to learn if you are." Before Caroline could respond, the door at the end of the hallway swung open. 3 members of the hotel's board of directors stood frozen in the doorway, their faces cycling through shock disapproval and the particular expression of people who had just found the scandal they were looking for. The fallout was immediate and brutal. By noon the next day, word had spread through the entire hotel. The Ice Queen and the night manager caught in a compromising position outside the staff room. The gossip was merciless, the speculation even worse. By evening, the board had called an emergency meeting, and Caroline had been summoned to answer for what they called conduct unbecoming of the company's leader. Derek sat in his apartment, watching Penny color at the kitchen table, and tried to pretend that his world wasn't falling apart. He had already drafted his resignation letter, already started looking at job listings in other cities. Whatever Caroline decided, he wouldn't let her sacrifice her company to protect him. That wasn't who he was. His phone buzzed with a message from Caroline. "Don't do anything stupid, I'm handling it." 3 hours later, she called him. Her voice was flat exhausted, stripped of everything that had made her seem invincible. "The board gave me an ultimatum," she said. "Fire you and issue a public statement about maintaining professional standards, or resign my position and forfeit my shares in the company." Derek closed his eyes. "Then fire me. It's not even a question." "No. Caroline, this is your life's work. Everything you've built, everything your father started. You can't throw that away for someone you've known for a week." "I've known you for a week," Caroline agreed. "But I've been looking for you my whole life. Someone who sees me, not just my title. Someone who isn't afraid to tell me the truth. Someone who reminds me that there are more important things than quarterly earnings reports and market share." Her voice broke on the last words. "I can't lose that." "I won't." "You're not losing anything," Derek said firmly. "I'm right here. I'll still be right here, whether I'm working at your hotel or pumping gas across town. But you have to protect yourself first. You have to protect what you've built." The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long that Derek thought she had hung up. Then Caroline spoke again, and her voice was different. Calm. Resolved. "I already handed in my resignation," she said. "Effective immediately. The board accepted it 15 minutes ago." Derek's heart stopped. "You didn't." "I did. And do you know what I felt when I walked out of that boardroom? Relief. For the first time in 20 years, I felt like I could breathe." She let out a shaky laugh. "I've spent my whole life building a monument to my father's memory, but I forgot to build a life of my own. I forgot that the whole point of success is having someone to share it with. Caroline, I can't let you give up everything for me." "You're not letting me do anything. This is my choice. The first real choice I've made for myself, in longer than I can remember." Her voice softened. "Besides, I'm not giving up everything. I'm finally reaching for the one thing that matters." Derek leaned against the kitchen counter, overwhelmed by emotions he couldn't name. Penny looked up from her coloring, her small face creased with concern. "Daddy, why are you crying?" He wiped his eyes and managed a smile. "I'm not crying, sweetheart. I'm just happy." "Is it because of Miss Caroline?" Penny asked with the uncanny perception of childhood. "Are you happy because you love her?" Derek looked at his daughter, at the crayon clutched in her small fist, and the innocent wisdom in her eyes. He thought about his wife, about all the promises he had made at her graveside. He thought about the years of loneliness, the nights spent wondering if he would ever feel anything again. "Yeah, baby," he said quietly. "I think maybe I am." 3 months later, on a sunny afternoon in early spring, Derek was working in the repair shop he had opened with the last of his savings. It was a small place, barely larger than a garage, but it was his. He fixed appliances and electronics for people in the neighborhood, charging fair prices and throwing in free advice for anyone who needed it. The work was honest, and the hours were flexible, and for the first time in years, he was home to put Penny to bed every night. The bell above the door chimed, and Penny burst in from the back room where she had been doing homework. Her face lit up with a joy that Derek had almost forgotten existed. "Daddy, there's a pretty lady outside. She's got a present for me." Derek set down his soldering iron and walked to the front window. His breath caught in his chest. A silver car was parked at the curb, gleaming in the afternoon light. And leaning against it, dressed in a simple sundress instead of her usual power suit, was Caroline Ashford. Her hair was loose around her shoulders longer than he remembered. In her hands, she held a picture frame. Derek stepped outside, wiping grease from his fingers on a rag. "You're a long way from the boardroom," he said. Caroline smiled, and it reached her eyes in a way he had rarely seen. "I sold my shares last month. used part of the money to fund a scholarship program for children of hotel workers. Named it after Rosie. Her voice wavered on her daughter's name, but she held steady. I've spent the last 3 months traveling, trying to figure out who I am without the company to define me. And what did you figure out? That I've been running from my grief for 15 years. That I built an empire to avoid dealing with my pain. And that somewhere along the way, I forgot how to let anyone in. She held up the picture frame, and Derek saw that it was Penny's drawing, the one with the 2 stick figures holding hands under the yellow sun. But this little girl reminded me what it feels like to be seen. And her father showed me that it's possible to survive loss without losing yourself. Derek's throat tightened. What are you saying? Caroline took a step closer, then another, until she was standing right in front of him. Close enough that he could smell her perfume, the same floral scent that had haunted him for months. I'm saying that I don't want to run anymore, she said. I'm saying that I spent 90 days traveling the world, and every beautiful thing I saw just made me miss you more. I'm saying that I have more money than I could spend in 3 lifetimes, but the only thing I want is right here in this little repair shop on the edge of town. Derek reached out and took her hand the same way he had in that hallway 3 months ago. What about everything you gave up? Your position, your power, your whole identity. I didn't give up anything that matters, Caroline said. I just finally found the courage to reach for what does. She looked into his eyes, and Derek saw everything she wasn't saying, all the fear and hope and desperate longing that mirrored his own. So I guess my question is, do you have room for me in this little shop in your life, in your heart? Before Derek could answer, Penny came barreling out of the shop and threw her arms around Caroline's waist. You came back? I knew you would come back. Daddy said you were very busy, but I told him you would come back because you promised to read me stories. Caroline knelt down and hugged the little girl tight, her eyes spilling over with tears she didn't try to hide. I did promise, didn't I? And I always keep my promises. Derek watched them together, these 2 people who had somehow become the center of his universe, and felt something crack open in his chest. Not pain this time, something else, something that felt like dawn breaking after an endless night. I don't have much to offer you, he said quietly. Just a small apartment and a struggling business and a 6-year-old who asks too many questions. Caroline stood up, keeping Penny's hand in hers, and smiled at him through her tears. That sounds like everything I've ever wanted. Derek pulled her close and kissed her right there on the sidewalk, with the afternoon sun warm on their faces and his daughter giggling between them. It wasn't a desperate kiss this time, not the frantic collision of 2 drowning people. It was something quieter, surer, the kiss of 2 people who had finally found their way home. When they broke apart, Penny was tugging on both their hands, trying to drag them toward the shop. Come on, I want to show Miss Caroline my homework, and then she can help me draw more happy pictures, and then we can have dinner together, like a real family. Derek caught Caroline's eye and saw his own wonder reflected there. A real family. It had been so long since those words meant anything but pain. Caroline squeezed his hand and let Penny lead her inside. At the threshold, she turned back and looked at him. You know, she said, the night we met, I sent you a message telling you to come to my room. Everyone assumed it was something scandalous. Derek smiled. Was it, I thought I was going to fire you, Caroline admitted. I thought I was going to punish you for breaking the rules and remind everyone that I was still in charge. She shook her head slowly. I had no idea that you were about to change my entire life. Derek followed her into the shop, into the warm clutter of tools and appliances and the sound of his daughter's laughter. The door's always open, he said, for both of you, for as long as you want. Caroline looked around at the humble little space, at the life Derek had built from the wreckage of his grief. Then she looked at him, and her smile was like sunlight breaking through clouds. Then I'm home, she said simply. and she was. The end.